Did ancient humans fall in love? Somewhere in Europe, roughly 25,000 years ago, a man is awake when he should be sleeping. The fire is low. Everyone else in the group is breathing in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. He's lying on his side, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about the same thing he's been thinking about for 3 weeks. He can't stop. He's tried. The thought keeps coming back. The specific way she laughed yesterday, what she said to the older woman during the plant gathering, the fact that she was standing close enough to him during the hunt that he could hear her breathing. He hasn't told anyone. He's not sure how to say it, or whether saying it would help, or whether help is even the right frame for what's happening. He just knows that something in his chest is behaving differently than it was a month ago, and that it's connected, specifically and exclusively, to one person out of the 25 people he has ever meaningfully known. In this moment, he is having an experience that is functionally identical to what is happening right now to approximately 500 million people on Earth tonight. Different fire, different cave, different name for what he's feeling. Exactly the same brain chemistry producing exactly the same keeping him awake at 2 in the morning result. This is the answer to the question. And it's the answer before we've even started. Yes, ancient humans fell in love. They fell in love the same way you fall in love, with the same brain systems producing the same feelings in the same sequence. The dopamine, the obsessive thinking, the specific fixation on one person, the inability to eat normally, the complete inability to stop. The interesting question is not whether they fell in love. The interesting question is what love looked like in a world with 25 people. No privacy, no way to leave, and everyone watching everything that happened between everyone else all the time. That story is considerably stranger and more recognizable than you might expect. In 2005, Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist at Rutgers University who had spent decades studying the neuroscience of romantic love, published the results of a study that placed people who described themselves as deeply in love into an fMRI scanner and showed them photographs of their partners. The brain scans showed activity in a specific region, the ventral tegmental area, a small structure deep in the brain that is part of the dopamine reward circuit, the same circuit that activates in response to cocaine, to gambling, to the anticipation of food when you are very hungry, to any experience the brain categorizes as intensely rewarding and wants more of immediately. Fisher described romantic love, based on these scans, not as an emotion but as a drive, more like hunger or thirst than like happiness or sadness, something that motivates behavior, that the brain treats as a priority, that doesn't respond well to being reasoned with or told to stop. The person lying awake thinking about someone they can't stop thinking about isn't choosing to do this. The brain has assessed this person as significant and is now running a program designed to motivate pursuit, which is exactly what it's supposed to do, and it does not have an off switch. The chemistry involved has 3 main players. Dopamine, the salience and motivation chemical, creates the urgency and the craving and the sense that this specific thing is the most important thing right now. Norepinephrine contributes the racing heart, the heightened attention, the inability to focus on anything else, the feeling that your body has been slightly upgraded in an uncomfortable way. And serotonin, or rather the reduction of it, produces the obsessive quality of early romantic love. A researcher named Donatella Murizidi at the University of Pisa measured serotonin levels in people who had recently fallen in love and found them comparable to the serotonin levels of people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Not because love is a disorder, but because the system that makes you unable to stop checking whether you locked the door is the same system that makes you unable to stop thinking about a specific person. This entire system is very old. It predates language, predates agriculture, predates every civilization that has ever existed. It is not a cultural invention or a romantic narrative that got attached to a more practical biological process. The brain structures involved are ancient, shared across mammalian species, present in human populations everywhere on Earth that has ever been studied. Ancient humans had this system, fully, completely, the same way you do. What they did not have was the context in which modern people exercise it. Here is a piece of arithmetic that changes everything. Your band is 25 people. Roughly half of those are women. That leaves 12 or 13 potential partners, maximum, before any other considerations. Now remove the children, depending on the specific group. Between a third and half of any hunter-gatherer band is under the age of 15. You are now looking at maybe 6 or 7 adult women. Now remove the people who are already partnered. In any functional group, most adults are in some kind of pair bond because pair bonds are not just romantic arrangements, they're economic and practical ones. They distribute the labor of survival. They establish who is responsible for whose children. They provide a specific stable unit within the larger group structure. Disrupting an existing pair bond isn't just romantic drama. It's a disruption to the group's functional organization. You might be down to 2 or 3 people in your viable consideration set. If you are unlucky, 1. If you are very unlucky, none. And you see all of these people every single day. There is no meeting someone at a party who turns out to live in a different city. There is no dating profile where you present a curated version of yourself and negotiate whether you want the same things. There is no option to end a relationship and never see the person again. The person you fall in love with is someone you have known your entire life and will continue to see every morning until one of you dies. The person you break up with is someone you will eat dinner within arm's reach of tomorrow night. This does not stop the feelings from happening. Nothing stops the feelings from happening, but it completely changes what you can do with them. The question of how partners were chosen in Paleolithic groups is one that archaeologists and anthropologists have spent decades trying to answer. The short version is, not randomly, not by lottery, not purely by proximity, though proximity obviously mattered, by demonstration. Across the ethnographic record of forager societies, the existing and recently documented groups that provide our best window into how our ancestors might have lived, mate choice consistently involves displaying what you can do. Not just that you are available, but that you are worth choosing. For men in most documented forager contexts, this meant hunting success. The ability to bring in significant amounts of food was not just economically useful, it was sexually attractive in a documented, consistent, cross-cultural way. David Buss, a psychologist at the University of Texas at Austin, conducted a study of mate preferences across 37 different cultures on 6 continents, published in 1989, and one of the largest cross-cultural studies of human mating behavior ever conducted. The pattern that emerged most consistently was that women across cultures and economic arrangements rated resource acquisition and provision as important qualities in a long-term partner. The specific resource varied with the context. In a forager group, the resource was food. This is not simply women like rich men, it is considerably more specific. In a world without agriculture, without food storage, without the possibility of stockpiling resources against future scarcity, the man who could consistently bring in significant calories was the man who significantly increased the probability that his partner and children would survive difficult seasons. The attraction was not to wealth as an abstraction. It was to demonstrated competence at the thing that kept everyone alive. But Buss's data showed something more nuanced than a simple exchange of resources for commitment. The qualities that both men and women rated highly across cultures included kindness, intelligence, emotional stability, and humor. These are not resource markers. These are character markers, traits that indicate how someone will behave under pressure, whether they can be trusted, whether they will remain cooperative when cooperation is costly. In a group of 25 people where you couldn't leave, and everyone's behavior affected everyone else's survival, character assessment was not a luxury. It was a critical life skill. Women in Buss's study also showed stronger preferences than men for partners who were slightly older, not dramatically but measurably. The anthropological interpretation, age in a forager context correlates with accumulated knowledge, established social relationships, and demonstrated survival track record. You can see a 20-year-old's physical strength. You cannot see a 40-year-old's knowledge of where the water sources are during a dry season, or the quality of the relationships they've built over decades that might be called upon in an emergency. Men, in Buss's data, showed stronger preferences for youth and indicators of reproductive health, traits that signal fertility and the capacity to successfully raise children. Again, the evolutionary interpretation is not flattering by modern standards, but is mechanically coherent. In a world before reliable contraception, before the separation of sex from reproduction, the question of who to invest significant resources in as a long-term partner had direct consequences for the number and survival of offspring. These are tendencies, not laws. Human mate choice is not determined by evolutionary pressures any more than human food choice is determined by the fact that we evolved to crave fat and sugar. We evolved the tendencies. We also evolved the capacity to recognize them, override them when they conflict with other values, and make choices based on an enormous range of considerations that the evolutionary framework doesn't capture. The person in the fMRI scanner falling in love isn't running a calculation. They're feeling something, and the feeling doesn't explain itself. Meet Kron. We don't know his name. But we know people like him existed because the archaeological record shows exactly what they did. Kron is a good hunter. He has been since he was 19. He knows animal behavior better than anyone else in the group, can read tracks that others miss, and 3 months ago brought down a large reindeer alone when the coordinated hunt fell apart. The group ate well for a week. He knew who was watching when he came back with it. He is also, in the specific way that matters right now, trying to communicate something to a woman named, let's call her Lena, who has been in his peripheral awareness in a different way for the past several months. He has started bringing her things. Not dramatically, not in a way that forces acknowledgement or creates obligation. A particularly good cut of meat left near where she sleeps. A specific plant he noticed she was looking for 3 days ago, appearing without comment, and last week, a mammoth bone, larger than anything practical, heavier than it needed to be, carried back from 2 hours away for no reason he could have explained out loud, left near where she sleeps without a word. Small demonstrations of having paid attention, of being someone who notices what she needs before she has to ask for it, and occasionally of someone who did something completely impractical because the alternative was not doing it. This is gift-giving as courtship, and it appears in virtually every documented human culture in some form. The specific gifts vary: food, tools, crafted objects, labor, protection, but the underlying logic is consistent. I am showing you, through concrete action rather than words, that I will prioritize you, that I am capable of providing for someone specifically, that choosing me has a material benefit that choosing someone else might not. Whether Lena is interested in Kron depends on things that vary enormously by individual: his personality, his social standing within the group, the nature of any existing relationships, her own preferences and history, and the particular constellation of qualities she finds herself drawn toward. The chemistry that Helen Fisher documented in fMRI scanners doesn't always fire in the direction of the most objectively suitable partner. It fires in directions that sometimes make perfect sense and sometimes make no sense at all, which was as true 30,000 years ago as it is today. What was different was what happened when the chemistry did fire. Modern love, when it works, involves a period of mutual discovery that can be managed in relative privacy. You figure out how you feel. You test the water. You have a conversation in relative isolation from the people around you. The relationship is established before most people in your social world know it exists. You have the option of navigating the early stages without an audience. There was no privacy in a band of 25 people. Everyone knew everything. The configuration of who was sleeping near whom, the direction of someone's attention during the evening meal, the extended eye contact that lasted half a second too long, the small gift that was offered and accepted. Nothing happened between 2 people in that group without the other 23 people having access to at least some of it. This had consequences in a group where every relationship mattered to every other relationship, because conflict between 2 people rippled into the functioning of the entire group, because hunting required cooperation and gathering required cooperation, and childcare required cooperation, and childcare required cooperation, and everything required that the group remained functional. Romantic attachment was not a private matter. It was a social event. The group had opinions. The group had preferences about whose pair bonds served the group's interests. Existing pair bonds had stakes in whether new ones formed. People whose children would be affected by new alliances paid attention to new alliances. Older members with longer social memory had perspectives on whether particular pairings were likely to be stable or disruptive. This did not prevent people from falling in love with whom they fell in love with. Love, as established, does not respond well to external management, but it meant that the experience of falling in love was embedded in social context in a way that modern romantic experience largely isn't. Now consider what happened when love went wrong, not the gentle disappointment of mutual incompatibility, discovered over 6 months of dating, but the specific crisis of 2 people who are both embedded in the same small group with no exit. Navigating the aftermath of something that didn't work, you still hunt together the next morning. You still sit near each other in the evening because the group is 25 people and there are only so many places to sit. You still receive updates about each other through the social network you both live inside every single day, indefinitely. Jealousy in this context was not an abstract emotion. It was a social force with immediate practical implications. David Buss documented jealousy across cultures and found it universal. The specific triggers varied, but the existence of jealousy as a response to perceived threats to a valued relationship appeared everywhere humans had been studied. Evolutionary psychologists interpret it as an adaptation, the emotional response that motivates behaviors to protect valuable pair bonds against competitors. In a group of 25 people, where the competitor for your partner's attention was someone you hunted with every day. Jealousy didn't stay internal. It surfaced in cooperation, in who you shared food with and who you didn't, in who you warned about animal tracks and who you let find out the hard way. In the subtle social mechanics of a small group, played out over years, the group managed this. It had to. Groups that didn't develop mechanisms for managing the social consequences of romantic attachment and its failures didn't stay functional long enough to become the groups that anyone descended from. The fact that we exist is evidence that the groups we came from found ways to navigate these dynamics without destroying themselves. The mechanisms varied: social norms about who could partner with whom, the involvement of older community members in facilitating or discouraging certain pairings, the customs around how relationships were established and dissolved. But they existed. They had to. Here's what Kron did not expect. 3 weeks after the bone, he watched someone else sit next to her during the evening meal. Not a stranger, someone he hunted with every day. Someone who, as far as Kron had understood, had no particular interest in her. He sat across the fire and ate without tasting anything. The conversation between them was not long. It might have meant nothing. He had no way to know. In a group of 25 people, you could not ask without everyone knowing you had asked. You could not show what you were feeling without the feeling becoming group information. You could not leave, walk it off, be somewhere else for a few hours until you had your face under control. He sat there and watched the fire and said nothing and ate nothing, and by morning had decided that the plant he'd been planning to bring her could stay where it was. Whether she noticed the plant not appearing, whether she noticed the change in how he sat during meals, whether any of it registered, these are things he didn't know and couldn't ask. This is the specific quality of heartbreak in a world with no exit. You continue to share the same 20 meters of space with someone, indefinitely, while running whatever version of this experience you are running, and they may or may not know, and you may never find out either way. Here's something that doesn't change. Every human society ever studied has love songs. Every one. Not every society has writing or formal religion or agriculture or permanent settlement, but every society, documented as far back as we can document anything, has some form of song or poem or story or ritual specifically dedicated to the experience of loving a particular other person. The oldest known love poem was found in Sumeria and dates to approximately 2000 BCE. It is explicit, personal, and reads recognizably as what it is. But the impulse it represents is considerably older than the writing that records it. Cave art across multiple sites shows images that researchers have interpreted as figures in states of romantic connection. Paired figures, figures in contexts suggesting intimate relationship, images that can't be confidently interpreted, but that don't suggest purely functional depictions. The universality of love song is important not just as a cute observation. It is evidence. When a behavioral tendency or cultural form appears in every human group studied, across every geographic range and every historical period we can access, the most parsimonious explanation is not that everyone independently invented it. The most parsimonious explanation is that it expresses something in the underlying architecture of the species, something that was there before any of the specific cultural forms that express it. That something is the pair bond, the biological tendency, not universal in its specific expression, but consistent as an underlying pattern for humans to form specific, preferential attachment to one individual partner, to coordinate survival and reproduction within that dyad, and to experience the emotional equivalent of system failure when that attachment is threatened or broken. The neuroscientist John Cacioppo, whose work on loneliness we've visited before, studied the neural overlap between social connection and reward processing. The brain, he found, processes social bonding through many of the same systems it uses to process other forms of reward and threat. A secure attachment feels like safety and warmth. A threatened attachment registers as danger. A lost attachment registers as loss in the same category as any other significant loss. These are not metaphors. They are descriptions of what the brain is actually doing. This connects to something that John Bowlby documented starting in the 1950s, and Mary Ainsworth expanded into a full empirical framework in the 1970s. Attachment theory. The observation that human infants form specific, preferential bonds with their primary caregivers, and that the quality and reliability of those early bonds shapes how the person relates to close relationships for the rest of their lives. Bowlby was working with human infants, but the attachment system he described is not a learned cultural behavior. It is a biological system, ancient and cross-cultural, present in every human population studied and in various forms across many other mammalian species. The infant who cries when the caregiver leaves and calms when they return is running a survival system. The caregiver is the source of warmth, food, and protection, and proximity to the caregiver is the difference between surviving and not. What researchers have found in the decades since Bowlby's initial work is that this early attachment system doesn't switch off when the infant becomes an adult. It transforms. The specific object of attachment changes from caregiver to romantic partner, primarily, but the underlying system, with its need for felt security, its response to perceived threat, its calibration of how reliable and available and responsive a close other is, keeps running in the same basic way. This means that the way someone experiences romantic love, whether they feel secure in it, or anxious and vigilant for signs of abandonment, or avoidant and uncomfortable with the closeness, is shaped in significant part by experiences that happened before they had language to describe them. Experiences that are, themselves, shaped by systems that have been running in the human species since long before agriculture. Your ancient ancestor lying awake by the fire isn't just running a mating algorithm. He's running an attachment system that has been active since the moment he was born, shaped by how consistently and reliably the people around him responded to his needs. Now pointing at a new object with all the intensity of a system that has been calibrated since infancy for exactly this kind of investment. Your ancient ancestor lying awake by the fire, thinking about the person he can't stop thinking about, is running the same software you are running when you can't sleep for the same reason. 30,000 years of cultural change sits between you. The fire is different. The language is different. The social world is almost entirely different. The feeling is indistinguishable. Now, think about the difference. Not in the feeling, but in the world the feeling is trying to operate in. Modern romantic love exists in a context of almost unlimited optionality. You can choose partners from a pool that, for many people, numbers in the thousands. You can present yourself across digital platforms that extend your reach far beyond anyone you've ever met in person. You can date multiple people simultaneously. You can end relationships without continued proximity to the person you ended them with. You can move to a different city. You can start over. The human brain did not evolve for unlimited optionality. It evolved for a pool of approximately 25 people, most of whom were unsuitable for one reason or another, which meant that when the chemistry fired, it fired towards someone specific within a very small set of real options, and the brain committed to making that work. Committed hard. Committed with the same intensity. It committed to hunting and gathering and everything else necessary for survival, because in the ancestral environment, a functional pair bond was survival critical. What this means in practice, the human brain, dropped into modern romantic conditions, tends to behave oddly. It falls in love easily, but struggles with optionality. It experiences the anxiety of choosing from too many options because it evolved in conditions where too many options didn't exist. It forms attachments and then questions them because the presence of other options reads as threat even when no threat is intended. It suffers intensely from rejection because in the ancestral environment, rejection from the limited pool of viable partners had real survival consequences. The dating app is not the problem. The brain encountering conditions its architecture wasn't calibrated for is the problem, and the solution, if there is one, isn't to have fewer options. The brain resists that too. The solution, if you can call it that, is understanding that the software is old, and the hardware has changed faster than the software has updated. Go back to the mammoth bone. He found it 2 days ago, the largest one he'd seen in months, more bone than anyone could use. He could have left it. He could have taken only the marrow and moved on. He carried the whole thing back to camp, which took most of the afternoon and left his shoulder aching. He left it near where she sleeps. She didn't say anything about it. She might have looked at him once, briefly during the evening meal. He's not sure. He lay awake for most of the night wondering. This is not a different experience from love as you know it. This is love as you know it, running in a world of 25 people, no exit options, and a mammoth bone as the most significant gift the landscape could provide. The feelings were the same. They have always been the same. The world they moved through was almost entirely different, which is the thing that makes both of you, him, lying awake by the low fire 30,000 years ago, and you, wherever you were reading this, feel at exactly the same time the exact same specific combination of hope and terror and certainty and complete uncertainty that has no better name than whatever we're calling it this century.